There is a crop existing today that makes modern farming look a little embarrassing. It grows like a sunflower, hides its real treasure underground, and once it takes root, it doesn't really leave. One planting can turn into years of harvests, even when the cold bites hard and the soil looks dead. Long before tractors, fertilizers, and seed companies, people across North America treated it like insurance, the kind of food you keep close when winters get ugly and hunger shows up early. Then explorers tasted it, carried it across the ocean, and for a moment it looked like the perfect crop for a starving world. And yet today, most people walk past it without realizing what they're stepping over. Because this root didn't disappear from the earth, it disappeared from the system. So if this plant can feed you without asking for permission, why did the world ever decide to forget it? Well, here is the story. It starts like a normal sunflower, tall stalks, bright yellow petals, the kind of plant you'd expect to see leaning toward the sun in late summer. Nothing about it looks revolutionary. Then you dig, because under that harmless-looking flower is a root system that behaves like it has its own survival plan. The sunchoke, Helianthus tuberosus, isn't an every-season-you-start-over crop. It's a perennial. Once it takes hold, it can return year after year, spreading through underground rhizomes and forming knobby tubers that sit beneath the soil like a hidden pantry. And long before anyone measured farming by profit margins, indigenous communities across North America already understood exactly what that meant. This wasn't just something you found in the wild when you got lucky. It was reliable. A patch could keep producing because the plant didn't need to be restarted from scratch every year. Leave a few tubers behind, and the next season the crop simply returned, expanding outward like a living food reserve that didn't need storage rooms, warehouses, or supply lines. The tubers themselves were practical too. They could be eaten raw with a crisp bite, or cooked until soft. They could be roasted in coals, boiled into a filling meal, or dried for later use. And the plant handled the hardest part on its own, surviving cold months underground, waiting until the moment it was needed again. That made it more than food. It made it insurance. The difference between a rough season being manageable and a rough season turning dangerous. Even today, sunchokes still grow across huge parts of North America, often in the places people ignore. Field edges, riverbanks, roadside patches. The plant never truly disappeared. It kept doing what it always does. And while it stayed rooted here in silence, one moment changed everything. Because in the early 1600s, this same plant got exported as hope. In 1605, long before the sunchoke became a forgotten root in North American ditches, it crossed the Atlantic as something far more exciting, a solution. French explorer Samuel de Caplan encountered it while traveling along the northeastern coast of North America, where indigenous communities were already growing and eating the tubers. Caplan wrote about the taste, comparing it to the artichoke, and he brought the plant back to France. The timing mattered. Europe in the early 17th century wasn't a world of stable food supplies. Harvest failures and famine were recurring threats, and farmers were always searching for crops that could produce more calories with less risk. The potato hadn't yet become Europe's dependable staple, and in many places it was still viewed with suspicion. So the sunchoke arrived as a workhorse. It could grow in poor soil, handle cold weather, and produce a heavy yield of edible tubers without demanding constant attention. Plant it, let it do its thing, dig it up when you needed it. And if you missed a few tubers in the ground, the next season it returned anyway, as if the plant refused to accept being finished. Across Europe, it picked up new names as it spread. In France, it became topinambour. In Italy, it was linked to the sunflower, girasole, because the plant above ground looked like a wild cousin of the sunflower fields people already recognized. It looked like the kind of crop that could rewrite the rules. Reliable, productive, hard to kill, and able to feed people who didn't have perfect land or perfect weather. For a while, that seemed cool, until it wasn't. During World War II, food became a weapon. In occupied France, German authorities seized huge portions of agricultural production to supply their armies. For ordinary families, that meant rationing, shortages, and meals that shrank week by week. Potatoes, bread, meat, anything dependable became harder to find. And when the reliable foods disappeared, the old emergency crops crawled back into the kitchen. Topinambour, The same root that had once spread through Europe like salvation returned as desperation food. It grew easily, often in forgotten plots and rough ground, and it didn't require perfect farming conditions. People ate it because they had to. Day after day, month after month, it became the taste of survival under occupation. And it wasn't loved. The tubers were small and awkward to clean. Cooked constantly, they wore people down. The inulin that made them nutritionally valuable also made them notorious for digestive misery when eaten in large amounts, especially by people who had no choice but to rely on them. Then came the Netherlands, and the winter that still carries its own name, the Hunger Winter of 1944 to 1945. As food supplies collapsed, families dug for anything edible in frozen ground. Thousands died of starvation. In that kind of cold, crops stored in barns could be taken or destroyed. But tubers left underground were harder to steal, harder to block, and sometimes the only thing left. When the war ended, something strange happened. People didn't celebrate the sunchoke for keeping them alive. They rejected it. Entire households refused to eat it again because it reminded them of the time life became nothing but hunger, fear, and waiting for it to end. So the sunchoke survived the war. Its reputation didn't. But war didn't change what the sunchoke actually was. You see, sunchokes are packed with minerals, especially potassium, along with iron, magnesium, and B vitamins. But the real reason scientists started paying attention is the carbohydrate inside the tuber. Unlike potatoes, which store energy as starch, sunchokes store much of theirs as inulin, often making up around half or more of the tuber's dry weight. Inulin is a type of soluble fiber humans can't fully digest in the small intestine. Instead, it travels to the colon, where beneficial gut bacteria break it down. That's why it's classified as a prebiotic. When those bacteria feed on it, they produce compounds like short-chain fatty acids that help support gut health, influence inflammation, and strengthen the environment that blocks harmful microbes. This is also why sunchokes behave differently in the body compared to starchy roots. They have a low glycemic impact, meaning they don't spike blood sugar the way potatoes can. That made them especially interesting for people managing diabetes, and by the late 20th century, sunchokes were being discussed in nutrition circles as a practical food for blood sugar control. Then there's the part modern agriculture doesn't talk about enough: what the plant does to the land. Sunchokes are perennial, so they don't need replanting every season, and they can be grown with less soil disturbance than annual crops. Their root system helps stabilize ground, and they tolerate harsh conditions, including drought, poor soils, and cold temperatures well below freezing. So the same tuber people once hated because it was war food turned out to be something else entirely. A root engineered for survival, built for extremes, and carrying a kind of nutrition that doesn't fit neatly into the starch-heavy diet most modern systems are designed around. But by the time the 20th century rolled around, the sunchoke was rare as it couldn't win a first impression. Well, even the name didn't help. Jerusalem artichoke sounded exotic, confusing, and honestly, wrong. It wasn't from Jerusalem, and it wasn't an artichoke. It was a sunflower root that had somehow ended up with one of the most misleading names in the produce world. Then a produce marketer in California saw what everyone else ignored. Frieda Caplan, the founder of Frieda's specialty produce, built her entire business on getting Americans to try foods they'd never heard of. In the 1960s, she started pushing unusual fruits and vegetables into supermarkets and onto restaurant menus, betting that curiosity could beat tradition. And when she looked at the Jerusalem artichoke, she didn't see a wartime vegetable or an awkward tuber. She saw a branding disaster waiting to be fixed. The solution was simple: change the name. Caplan popularized the term sunchoke, linking it back to what it actually is: a sunflower plant with edible tubers. It sounded warmer, cleaner, and less like something you'd find in a history book. Later, the name was even trademarked for marketing and retail use, and the crop finally got a second chance in front of consumers who weren't carrying old European trauma or famine memories. Once the name stopped scaring people off, chefs started experimenting. Sunchokes had a natural sweetness and a nutty flavor when roasted. Cooked into soups and purees, they turned creamy and rich, the kind of texture that makes a simple root feel expensive. But even after the comeback, the sunchoke still had one problem that no rebrand could solve. It refuses to behave like a modern crop. Industrial agriculture is built around predictability. Uniform size, uniform timing, harvest windows you can schedule down to the week. Crops that can be dug up by machine, washed in bulk, stored for months, shipped across continents, and still look perfect under supermarket lights. Sunchokes don't fit that world. They mature unevenly, and the tubers come out in weird shapes that make large-scale cleaning and processing harder. They bruise more easily than potatoes, and they don't sit patiently in storage the same way a hard-skinned crop does. That alone makes them risky for big distributors who need shelf life to justify long transport and warehouse time. But the real nightmare is what happens after harvest. With potatoes, you dig the field and you're done. With sunchokes, you're never really done. The plant spreads through underground rhizomes, and even small pieces left behind can sprout again. That's why gardeners love them, and large-scale growers often hesitate. Once you introduce them to a field, removing them completely can take repeated digging and persistent effort. In places where they've escaped cultivation, especially in parts of Europe, Helianthus tuberosus has been labeled invasive because it can form dense stands and outcompete other plants along riverbanks and disturbed land. So the crop ends up trapped in a strange place. It's too productive to ignore, too nutritious to dismiss, and too stubborn to fully control. And then there's the thing people still joke about: the inulin. The same prebiotic fiber that makes sunchokes valuable is also the reason some people experience gas if they eat a lot without gradually adapting. You can reduce it by cooking them thoroughly and starting with small portions. But modern food culture doesn't love adjustment periods. It loves instant comfort, so sunchokes remain what they've always been. A plant that feeds without asking permission. Great for survival, great for home gardens, great for anyone who wants independence. Not so great for a system that needs crops to stay obedient. But what do you think? If the supply chain breaks tomorrow, would you rather have a pantry? Or a crop that hides its food underground all winter? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more amazing videos like this one.